to another episode of Molten Truth. This is Zoe talking to you. And this week we have Ben Leman. I got it right this time. We had tried a false start at recording our podcast episode, and Ben very graciously said his name correctly without making me feel bad about it. Ben, welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Zoe. It really means a lot to me to be on your show and share my story with your audience. So thank you.
We're glad to have you, fellow Texan. We love that.
Oh
Um,
yeah, Texas pride. You can't get away from that.
it's like a whole other country, even though it's not technically a
Yes,
country anymore.
right, right. I always tell people it's the best country in the United States.
That works. It's one of those big names, like you got your Texas, you got your California, your New York, and then you have everyone else. And of course, everyone else is going,
Right.
"That's not right," but
Yeah.
but
Right.
but they're just those big names out there that
Yeah.
they stand out.
I've never been anywhere in the world and where I say, I always say I'm from Texas and everybody knows where that is
Yeah,
around the world.
absolutely, absolutely. No matter where you go in the world, yeah, Texas is known.
Yeah.
You might be from. I'm going to pick on Iowa because I lived there once upon a time, and people even in the United States are like Illinois or Ohio. They never remember Iowa, and
Right, right, right.
and anyone from Iowa could attest to that. I'm sure they've had many of those
Yeah,
same conversations like I did. It's like that place that's out of the
right,
way up there, somewhere north.
right, right.
So before we get in, because I will forget if I don't do it right now, what is your website?
Yes, my website is benlemanauthor.com, and that's spelled BenLeman, author.com.
Great. So the first take, we did a little joke about possibly being related to the French version of the car, and I think that's how we got onto Texas, and you being from Central Texas, and of course being
Yeah,
from Texas. I claim Texas as home because that's where feel like I became the person I am. My family
yeah, that's
moved
good.
around a lot, so I've lived in the Midwest, I've lived out on the West Coast, I've lived a little bit of everywhere. But during the important years of a person's life, when they're a teenager up to their mid
Yeah,
20s, I mean that's really I think where the personality really sets. Um,
sure, absolutely.
so
Yeah,
I was there in Texas, and that is who I am.
yeah. No, that's a good reason right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I always claim it home for that reason alone. So you were telling us, because I'm learning about you just like our audience is, some of your background. So you mentioned you're a father of four.
Father of four, husband to my wife Christy for over 20 years.
Nice.
So that's probably my favorite part of my life that I enjoy and cherish the most. But beyond that, professionally speaking, I am a businessman. I started a company back in '97, co-founded it in my mom's garage, and we ended up growing up to over 100 employees and 25 stocking locations around the world. I traveled all over the world for my company, ended up selling it in 2012, and stayed on for one more year for the transition, and then left and went into public service for the next 10 years. I was a county judge in Grimes County, and then also was a state representative here in Texas. And so we live, I'm a rancher. That's a big part of my life. We run cattle and have had just about every single animal you could imagine, and enjoy that. We live in a very rural setting. And then also, I recently started, what my next real goal is here is to write novels. I've written a historical fiction novel. It's the first in a trilogy. It's called Between the Times, and it's a historical fiction novel that takes place in Scotland in the 1640s.
Oh,
And the trilogy is Forged in Blood.
nice. Now, have you always had an interest in Scotland, or what made you choose that particular vehicle for your story?
Yeah, so it started off with just a little bit of family research, ancestral type research, and that led me to a broader story in Scotland. I'm a descendant of one side of my family of Scotland, of Clan Lamont, Lamont, and there's this personal story of how they came over to the United States, and but as I dug into it, I learned a little more on the front end of that story about just various events that were happening, in particular in the 1640s, that really just kept me digging, and they're like the roots in a tree. It just little fingers going off in all kinds of directions that just led to an amazing story. And I started to connect the dots, and that's when I really felt like this is the book I want to write.
I get that. It's amazing how much you can find these little trinkets or these little jewels in our own history or even in the history of other people. I met a lady the other night, and I say I met her. I see her like once a year. But in all these years, I never thought to ask her about the origin of her last name. But a friend of mine who was visiting did, and I happened to be standing there. And oh my goodness, it was the most fascinating story about her
Oh
name.
yeah.
Last name is Music. And
Oh wow.
turns out that I'm not going to give the whole story, but basically, they had changed their name because their ancestor had crossed on the ocean, to settle here in the United States, and they took things that were on the ship to design instruments and would sing and play, and that by doing that, they actually actively prevented people from doing a mutiny several times across
Oh
the
yeah.
voyage.
Right. Like entertainment,
Yeah,
distraction. Yeah.
exactly. Music tames the savage beast, right? Even man.
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, that was just the most fascinating story, and it never would have occurred to me had the friend not asked
Yeah.
that question. So
Yeah, it's a neat topic, and it's one of the underlying themes of my novel. And I think it's a thread that binds the vast majority of Americans, in particular, because the vast majority of our population has ancestors that came from the old
yeah,
world, right? I mean,
yeah,
aside from Native Americans, the
yeah.
rest of us have old world roots, and
Yes.
so somewhere in there is this fascinating story about why each one of our ancestors came over. And this is a story about that. And where I see it is it's really, if the founding fathers and the people that fought the revolution were the seeds of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
right? The people that came before them, that were the ones that settled the colonies, and really on the front end of that, they were the fertile soil.
Yeah.
They were leaving some sort of struggle or trying to pursue more opportunity, whatever it was. There was a better life they thought they could get, even though there was no economy, no structure, no nothing here for them to get going with. And that's a fascinating story, and I really think it helps to unite this country, in particular, in a time where things seem so divided. We all appreciate the freedoms of today that we have here, right? And there's a story and an evolution on how we got here, right or wrong, good or bad. It has all elements of that, but over time, we're here where we are today.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. I think everybody can agree on that. The freedoms we enjoy today are much better than the lack of freedoms and opportunities in the 1640s.
Right.
So that's for sure. So and that's kind of at the heart of that. This is a story that's just one slice of bread, one sliver of the story that applies to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's so good. It's funny because it's so true. These people came here and there was nothing. They literally carved out their existence. They chopped down trees to make their place that they lived in. They had to figure out how to do their food. And we're like, we whine if we have to drive, more than 30 minutes to the grocery store or more than an
Right.
hour if you're out in the rurals.
Yeah, we're over 45 minutes, and we have to drive at least 45 minutes to a grocery store. But you're right. It's so very true. Like the best we can compare it to is like, let's go create a colony on the moon. That's something we can kind of understand. That's what we're talking about here. There was no communication back, to civilization that was anywhere close to being efficient. You were on your own, and
Yeah,
carving a life out of the dirt and soil and woods, like you said. So it was a tough road to hoe for sure.
absolutely. Literally and figuratively.
Both. That's right.
I wonder what we would do, like if suddenly one day we, you know, we did not have the resources that we have now. We didn't
Yeah.
have the ability to just go to the grocery store, or didn't have, for some reason, electricity. What
No.
would we do? Would we
How would
then
people
leave these
react?
cities, and would we go to places that are still unsettled here in the States? Because there's a big swaths of land, even in Texas, that are
Yeah.
completely unpopulated. So would we
Right.
stretch out further? Would we then try to, grow food, figure things out, or would we still huddle together in the cities?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I mean, certainly, I do think that in general, as people have become more educated about the different things that are in their food that they're eating, or more informed, I guess I should say, about the food, the different aspects of the food they're eating, how they're modified genetically, or how the different uh, pesticides and things that go on them, and what's a good diet versus not a good diet. I think people, at least I've seen a general movement towards trying to eat a little bit healthier. Grow some vegetables in your backyard, have a little raised garden. You can do a lot, and we love it.
It's true. Have you ever spent any time outside of the country? Like, have you ever gone and maybe lived abroad for even a few weeks or a month or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I've gone abroad. I've probably been to 20 different countries. And most of the time when I've gone, it's been a couple 2 3 weeks or something like that. But as far as living, I guess the closest I could say is in the wilds of Alaska. I've spent 3 months there at a
Yeah.
at a time, and that's like a whole nother world, not just like another country. I know it's still part of the United States, obviously, but it's so isolated. It is truly the last frontier, and you are truly your best chance at survival. There's no emergency services out there coming to get you. Basically, if you have any acute situation, and you have to use your own head and own thoughts to navigate the dangers that are there, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah. So I would guess, switching gears back to travel, you must have gone and visited Scotland at some point to help with your maybe research with your book.
I did. So, there was an interesting story on how I decided to write the novel first, and then that's what, or when I decided to write a book. Let me back up there, and that generated my desire to go overseas to Scotland and do some more research. So, I guess I'll start off with that quick little story because I think it's very important. You know, this was in 2013 when a dear friend of mine, he was a mentor of mine and a colleague, and we've gone through a lot together in the business world, and he got cancer, and he was dying of pancreatic cancer, and he was very near the end. And it was my last time to go see him. It was on his it was on his deathbed. I mean, it was the last time. And so I went in, his wife answered the door, and got to go visit with him. And after the visit, I said my goodbye, and I started to walk out of the room because he fell out of consciousness, and he wasn't getting back up. So I went out the door, and as I was heading out of his bedroom door, he came to, and he said, "Between the tines," and I didn't know what he said. He mumbled it. I couldn't really understand him. In hindsight, that's what he said. But when I heard it, I didn't understand it. So I turned around, I went back, and I was like, "John, what did you say? I didn't hear you." And he said, "But," and he kind of stood, sat up a little bit, and was like, "Between the tines, Ben, between the tines." And I said, "John, what are you talking about? I don't understand what between the tines is." And he goes, "That's what you're going to call it." And I said, "That's what you're going to call what? What I'm going to call what?" And he said, "That's what you're going to call your book, your first book, Between the Tides." And just as fast as he came to, he went back out of conscious. He went unconscious,
Wow.
and I stayed there because I wanted to have follow up on that conversation, but unfortunately was not able to. He didn't come to at that time, and so I did leave, and that left me wondering what in the world was that about, and where did he get that idea from? So my initial reaction was, well, geez, great, John, thank you very much for obligating me to writing a novel, or a book, and I kind of thought, well, maybe it's going to be a leadership book because at the time, my background, I felt some type of leadership lessons. I've, navigated a rapid growth and growing a business, but over time, I started to think more about a broader uh, topics, just a broader range of topics.
Yeah.
And I was doing some family research, and I got dug into this story a little bit from my family's perspective and how it all worked, and that's what got me interested. And so from there, I did when I decided I wanted to learn about this story. I flew to Scotland. I took my family with me for or part of my family with me for this,
Hmm.
and my wife and some of the kids. And I mean, we went all over Southwest Scotland visiting these castles that are in my novel. The significant events that took place. We visited a lot of those facilities, those areas, those towns and communities. Went to museums. We stood at some of the monuments where significant events happened. And then we also went to Ireland and continued that because this story kind of goes over both in both countries a little bit. And
Sure.
so, but yeah, I spent time there researching this for sure.
Nice. That is so great. I'm sure that's going to lend a lot of authenticity to the story. So I'm curious. I mean, had you ever even talked about writing ever with your friend, or had he seen things you'd written in the past? And I mean, any thoughts about that as to how that could have triggered him to say what he said?
I have not that I do not recall having any conversations with him ever about writing a book.
Okay.
Maybe we did. I don't believe we did. I don't recall any. I certainly do not recall any, and I don't think that's where what generated the that his statement. I think it was something maybe it was on his mind, obviously, but it was very strange as it was right at the tail end there. I mean, literally, I
His
mean,
last
out of the
words.
blue as I was leaving, and those last words to me, and so
Yeah.
I read a little deeper into it than just an idea he had, and that's why I took that obligation seriously. I was not just an obligation, but I took that opportunity seriously to make this a meaningful endeavor, make it something that I could stand behind and say, "Hey, I put a lot. Not only did I put a lot of time in this, but the reader is going to get a lot out of it.
Mhm.
The reader is going to not only enjoy it and be entertained, but there's a lesson here to be learned, that I'm trying to get across to the reader that is I feel is important and definitely worth contemplating.
Yeah.
I really do. Yeah, but no, I had not. I'm an avid reader. I've always read books. Always read books, but of all types of genres. But historical fiction has always been my favorite. It's always been my favorite.
Cool. Well, then it makes sense that that's what you would embrace to do your books. So I'm
Yeah,
curious. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, no, please continue your
No,
thought.
no, no. No, you know what your audience wants to hear more than I do.
The
So,
truth is, I really don't. I'm just going to have a fun conversation and they're along for the ride, whether they like it or not.
okay.
Hopefully,
Well,
they like
you
it.
know what I was going to say. Yeah, right. I hope they do. The so I did. This was isn't my first novel. I let me clarify that. I did write a novel to practice and identify my process for writing a novel. So
Mhm.
this, I would say, this Between the Times is my first novel that I intended to publish. It's my first novel that I looked at as I'm going to put my heart and soul into it and develop a really, really good product that I really am proud of and want to stand behind and promote. But before I could do that, I had never written a novel before. You know, I thought to myself, well, I've never written a novel before, and I just don't want to. This is too good of a story just to have it be my first time.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a novel that was about half the length, of 70,000 words. This novel is about 140,000 words.
Okay.
So it's a full length novel, very complex story, but boiled down efficiently and it moves quickly, so it keeps the reader engaged. But the first novel really helped me sharpen my sword and identify my process that I wanted to use when I wrote a novel, as far as just the mechanics of it. How do you go about writing a novel? Do you just sit down and start writing, or do you write an outline? Or do you fill in some deeper, areas of that outline? So I kind of got that out of the way, and then I focused on this novel. So yeah, that was kind of I thought, a neat, just a neat approach to learning how to write better before you really write something you want to put your heart in.
Sure. I'm trying to think like a model before you build the actual house, for lack of a better illustration.
Yeah, right. It's like blueprints on. That's exactly right. Like blueprints for your house or a model. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this other
yeah.
book
And I
that you
enjoyed the process.
wrote, was it just for
Yeah.
family and friends, or just for you alone, or did you happen to publish it?
No, I had no intention on publishing it. It was really just for me and me alone. I had two other people read it
Mm-hmm.
that I wanted to get some feedback, just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit feedback and kind of get into the ballpark of is this flowing right? Does it flow? Does it make sense? It was a different genre. It wasn't historical fiction. That takes a lot of research. This was more of a thriller, adventure thriller type book, but the process is what I was focused on. I was focused on the process of writing, and so yeah, no, that's how that was. Yeah,
Okay, very interesting. We all have our approaches. I know for myself, I dove in feet first with my first novel. However, about 20 years before that, I had written a book that never got published except for like three copies. And it was purely what I called a homesick project. It was how I comforted
yeah.
myself with a situation beyond my control. So I wrote this book. But I never
Oh,
considered
right.
it
Yeah,
a book, it was just that.
therapy.
Um,
Yeah,
but it was there in the background.
yeah,
20 years later, I finally decided to actually write something, to specifically publish. But it was always there in the
yeah,
background. So we
yeah.
all
It was
have
interesting.
interesting stories. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure you learned a lot from that first time. I did, from my first one, and then I applied those lessons to my second one, and I think some of the bigger lessons that I think are important that I learned is one thing. It can be very difficult for whether you're in the business world or as an author, is to be able to step back from your own creation or your own ideas and actually objectively look at it and say, is that a good product, or is it the best product I can put forward? Right? Is it my best foot forward, or can I do better than that? And what I did was, when I wrote my this novel, Between the Times, I had 10 test readers that I really felt matched my target audience, that were interested in historical fiction like this. Some men, some women, and I different ages. I tried to mix it up,
Mm-hmm.
and really got their just really good feedback, good honest feedback, and it ended up, I rewrote my novel. I rewrote after I finished the first draft. I did a heavy rewrite on not just once but two times,
Wow.
two times, because what happened was as I wrote the story, you do your initial research, which takes a long time, and I
Mhm.
did a lot of that.
Yeah.
But as you're writing, you get into certain situations, circumstances or certain areas of your book, and you're going to do more research at that moment. And in that time, you can discover many other things, and I did. And so as I continued writing the novel, I realized the goal, the underlying theme of my novel just kept getting more and more serious and interesting to me, that that I wanted to focus on. And in order to highlight that, and for that to be taken seriously, I had to change the tone of the personalities of the characters, right? So
Mm.
if you're trying to get some serious ideas across, comedy is great in some ways, but it's at a point it can take away from some serious, lessons that you're trying to get across. And so I minimized, not minimized, I reduced, some of the comedy in there, not comedy, but that side of the entertainment, the lighter side, and got took my reader deeper into their personalities and thought processes of
Yeah.
what those individuals were going through, and drawing those readers in, and connecting them to the people of this time period. And so that changed, and so I ended up, like I said, rewrote it two times, and the final product, I feel, is a home run. I feel like it's a really good story that is entertaining, but also, worth walking away from and continuing to think about. It stays with the reader. It'll stay with you.
That's really excellent. And I'm really impressed that you, first of all, found 10 readers of varied ages that were willing to help read that and do that. That's sometimes that's hard to come by. So, that's well done. And then the fact that you went back and took that and rewrote based on their feedback. I mean, wow. Because we do, as authors, we tend to fall in love with our words. It's really hard for us to it's like they're your child, and sometimes we're blind to our child's faults. So the same thing as an author,
Right.
our book is our love, it's our child, and it can do no wrong until someone tells you otherwise.
Right. But the key, and you said it, but I want to highlight what you mean, what I think you mean, which, when you it's not just 10 readers, but it's 10 readers that will give you honest feedback.
Yes.
You know, you have to have that type of relationship. If it's somebody that's a soft personality that doesn't like to,
No
put any waves
confrontation.
in the water, doesn't want to have a discussion about what they mean because it just makes them nervous or whatever. That's not the right test reader. I need somebody to punch me in the nose and tell me what they're thinking.
Sometimes we do need that
Look
little
me up.
slap around. Yep. Tell us how
Yes.
it really is. Tell us what you really think.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
So, did you
Yeah.
know from the beginning that it was going to be a trilogy? Was that always the plan? Or did your plan kind of gradually change, maybe as you researched or as you began writing?
No, that's a great question. It changed. So so kind of where I'm headed with my future as an author is I want to take this story. Well, let me answer your question first, and I'll come back to this. So sorry about that. So the answer is no. It started off as one book, okay, but as I dug into it, and I wrote it, and I realized how much this can connect people, how people can identify with this story regardless of what country their ancestors came from, right?
Mhm.
uh, that they will really, uh, they'll really connect well with this story. So I thought, well, what I want to do is I want to take this same story, I want to write it from a different country's perspective, right? Maybe go to France, maybe go to Germany, because in Texas we have a lot of German settled areas, right? We have Czech settled areas. We have all these different areas. People came over and settled in communities, and there's a story there that really ends up connecting us all, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was kind of the where I was going to do it with a one book, you know, effort here from Scotland.
Yeah.
Well, as I got into the story, and rewrote it, and understood the deeper story. It really, I really, really, there's just no way around having a trilogy. To tell this story right, you got to be thorough enough to get to take the reader through the evolution of thought,
Yeah.
and so this story, the main character ends up at a crossroads. Aaron Lamont is the son of the chief of Clan Lamont, and they're drawn into a conflict. And this neighboring Clan Campbell's very strong and powerful, and they intend to commit genocide. Is
Mm,
what goes on, and so this conflict begins, and the main character ends up at a crossroads, and he's got to figure out, do I stay, and how do I stay, or if I do stay or don't stay, do I defend my family's honor, my clan's honor, the loyalty to the clan to stay here and fight to death, potentially, or do I make the jump and go overseas and try to take people with me? What do I do here? And that's where, you got to read the book to understand the historical aspects of what happened, to learn about that. But that's the crossroads that not only the main character of my novel arrived at, but so many other people. That you don't hear about that as much when you hear about Scotland and Ireland and all that. You hear, this king was trying to overtake this king, and it was between kings, and these clans were just, common people way out there, the Highland clans, and but you hear about that broader conflict, which is the background. That all this takes place during that time. But
right.
this is a story between the clans, right? The Scottish Highland clans and the warring factions between themselves
Mm,
at this time, which was probably the most deceitful time and manipulative time with respect to relationships between each other, due to the pressure of the background story, right? The War of Three Kingdoms, Ireland, Scotland, England, all in a civil war, all ruled by the same king, all in a separate civil war. Three different countries in a separate civil war, ruled by the same king. People were changing sides, flipping, lying, cheating, stealing, whatever. They just weren't honoring loyalty. Some were. So it's a neat story.
I think so. It's just crazy times. Crazy to think about all of that. So,
Yeah.
when you've gotten this trilogy done, you sound like a man who plans to continue writing. Have you given thoughts to, are
Yeah.
you going to stay in the world of Scotland and these clans, or are you going to go off in a different direction? Have you given any thought to these things?
Yeah, my intention is continue to do what I described earlier. Is where I sit right now is I feel there's a story from a lot of different countries,
Mm,
and that's similar. And it may not be in the same time period in the
mhm.
1640s. Maybe the Germans didn't come over en masse in 1640. Maybe some did, and for different reasons. Maybe some may have been religious reasons, whatever. But uh, but I know at different times in history they were coming for very significant reasons from various countries. Right, people
Right.
were fleeing their own home country, coming to the United States later, or the colonies in hopes of a better, brighter future. And I think those are neat stories to tell, but also, I'm enjoying Scotland. I really like Scotland. It's gonna be hard to leave Scotland. There's a lot of clans have had a lot of friction in this time period, is what I've learned, and this story affects. I mean, it's a broad topic, and so we'll see how it goes. Maybe I tell another perspective from the same country in the future, but maybe I move on to another country. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to the journey, regardless of what you choose. And it's no joke. I mean, Texas, so full of so many different cultures that have fled. I mean,
Yeah.
as recently, I left Texas a long time ago, but before I left, I think it was in the early 2000s. I think all the Bosnians had fled, so there was a hefty Bosnian population there in Dallas
Yeah,
where I lived. And I'm
yeah,
sure there's probably been more
absolutely.
since then, but a lot to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, you go back, like Fredericksburg in Texas, that's a German settlement, very historical, and there's a lot of those. Schulenburg, there's a lot of those communities where they intentionally tried to maintain their culture, right?
Yeah.
Their community over here in Texas, and there's the Czechs did the same thing. The I mean, there's just a whole the Polish, like I said,
Mhm.
there's a lot of them like that, and to you walked in those towns today, they still maintain that culture. They really try to preserve it and protect it, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I
It's
mean, it's,
beautiful to watch and be a part of,
yeah. We get to
and I
enjoy that
enjoy that
culture
about
without
Texas.
actually
There's a lot.
having to leave the states.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I think I talked over you. So if you want to finish your thought, I just couldn't keep my mouth shut.
Oh no, I agreed. I mean, I've been all over Texas. When I was a state representative, I went to a lot of these communities. They have festivals. The Czech Folk Festival. There's or associations that like the Czech Association of people that were descendants of people that came over here, and I mean they're very active. They're very active. They have festivals, and you get to eat their kolaches, and you know it's good food and good times for sure.
Absolutely. I, as I was telling you before we started recording, I grew up in this small town near Cedar Creek Lake in Texas. And so we were very close to the town of Ennis. And in Ennis, there was what they called a Soko Hall, which was basically, I think, a Czech like dance hall. So we had many good
Oh,
times enjoying dancing at that place. We'd go there occasionally to visit, even though we ourselves, we're not of that culture, but we sure enjoyed having them there. So
right, right, for sure. It is neat.
yeah. So we're coming up pretty close to our time. So I want to get this in before I forget about it. Um, the random question that a previous guest leaves. So the last guest asked, whether it's, maybe a hobby you have or your chosen form of art or even your career. How has what you learned about one of those things helped you to be a better person in the world?
Yeah. I'd say being a force to help people achieve their dreams. That's one of the things I've learned in life as a leader. In the business world, it was if you can help somebody become the best they can be. I always used to tell my employees, I want my company to fulfill your dreams, your employment dreams. I want to help you get there. I want to help you succeed, and I want to help give you the tools to do that, the training, whatever it is. I'm hoping that I can fulfill that dream here at this company. And so, as a leader, really what you're doing there is helping them become a better person, right? As a leader, it wasn't just fulfill their dreams, but that affects a lot of aspects of their life. It's not just did they get the training, then it's hey, they've got some personal circumstances that are causing them stress and causing them to not maximize, be the best they can be, and they come to you and ask advice, and you try to help them navigate those waters to help them be the best they can be and get overcome those personal obstacles. So and then with coupled with that is understanding that we can't, as individuals, it's very difficult to achieve at a higher level alone.
True.
It's much more efficient and more possible if you have a good team of people that are like-minded in their approach, meaning their work ethic, and they're collaboratively, like they're working together as a team, than it is to go at it alone. It's a heavy lift when you do things alone. So being a part of a team, learning how to be a team member, learning how to not just be a leader but a follower, learning how to follow, and lead and know when to do which one. I felt I've touched a lot of people's lives in that regard and helped them improve their leadership skills in that regard. And so I'm trying as I come here to write this novel today, as I fast forward today, my goal is to help people, bridge the old world to the new world, right? And put people back in touch with our roots,
Mm.
that, so that they, in the hopes that they realize the freedoms we have today are better than what we had. The freedoms and opportunities today are better than what we had in the 1640s, like we mentioned earlier.
Right.
But it was a rough road to get here. It was a rough road. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always right. It wasn't always good, and there were imperfections, of course. But through that evolution, it is what we have today, which is much better than it was. And that thread is something that we can all weave together. All these different threads, we each have that thread, that
Mhm.
story, and we can weave it together and unite a little bit more in the celebration of that freedom. And so, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with this book today, in a small way, just to have people contemplate about the various historical aspects of how we got to where we are here in the United States of America, and how our world is connected, because it wasn't just a one way deal. After that, freedom spread around the world, right? Freedom's
Right.
improved. I mean, I know there's still areas that need improvement. Don't get me wrong, but overall across the world, a lot has improved.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm assuming your book has already come out, right? It's already out there for people to be able to get a
No,
copy.
no, the release date is April 28th.
April 28th,
April
so it's coming
28th
up.
is,
Okay.
is the release date, and you can pre-order it right now on Amazon. You just go to Amazon or my website. You can go to my website, benlemanauthor.com. There's a button you can click to pre-order it from Amazon. But it gets released April 28th,
Okay.
right around the
Good.
corner.
Sounds good. So by the time this podcast actually is out, it will already be available. So that'll be excellent. And so it's available on
Yeah, great.
Amazon and any other places other than your website.
Yep, it's through Amazon. Everything's through Amazon.
Okay.
There you can, as far as the pre-order goes. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's where it's at. So,
Okay.
and when you go to my website, you can follow my social media preference of whatever it is that whichever social media you want to follow me on, to stay updated on the next book in the series, or in the trilogy, or anything else you want to stay updated on there.
Sounds good. So before we close this
Mhm.
out, I'll give you a choice. Either anything randomly that you'd like to share with our audience, or if you can't think of anything, maybe a tidbit of a favorite part of the book that's coming out. So your choice.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, I think one thing that I'll take the first option. I know you focus a lot about in your conversations about overcoming obstacles, right? That's kind of one of the themes of your show. Is that,
True.
do I have that right? Yeah.
That is true. That's how
And
the
so,
show came about.
yeah, 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 and I think that's a great topic, because I do feel that to succeed in life, you have to have the mindset of, I'm going to overcome every obstacle in front of me. I think you have to have that mindset. And one of the big obstacles I had in my life that I overcame was the loss of my father at a young age.
Mm.
It played a significant role in my life in many ways. I was 8 years old, and so a family of seven. I had six siblings, and my mother did not remarry. And so, when you lose a father at a young age, this world, it's you go through it, and you're growing up, and you're eventually trying to figure out what kind of man am I, right? What kind of man do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? Without, I had my mother's influence every day, but I didn't have my father's influence directly, right? Every day, tangibly, and it certainly had his memories, his example, his thought processes that I could remember and discuss with my families, and had a great example of what kind of person I wanted to be. But I still had to navigate this confusing world on my own, there, and so I feel like that was a big obstacle at one point. I as I got older, in my late teens, I was very discouraged about not having had my father there, and looking around my friends, and they all had their father they go throw the baseball with, or whatever. So I got a little bitter about that, and then eventually I had a significant discussion and a thought process, kind of focused on it, and really came to the conclusion that I changed my whole mindset from that day forward, and it was that my father has always been there for me. He always has. I've always thought about what he would think, if what advice would he give me, right? That's kind of how I would approach problems throughout my childhood. What would dad say about this? What would he be thinking? And so through that, I believe my father was there for me, if it, in more tangible ways than I gave him credit for. So I feel that definitely helped shape the person I am, my mentality, this I can do this mentality. I can be all these things and be anything I want to be, do anything I want to do if I focus on it and try to do it. And so that's just a part of my background that I think is worth sharing.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so before I
Yeah.
forget, do you have a random question for our next guest?
Yes, I've thought about this, and we talk a lot about our own obstacles, right? Because we have really, really good firsthand knowledge of it and go into depth. But what we don't talk much about is what is the most impressive obstacle you've ever witnessed somebody else overcome?
Oh, that's a
Not
good one.
yourself, because there's some pretty amazing people out there that have some very tough obstacles that have had some very tough obstacles that they've overcome, and so we can broaden our pool to choose from if I open up the question like that.
I like it. That is an excellent question. So I think that's the perfect note to end our broadcast. So tune in next week for the answer to our next guest question, to what is the most impressive obstacle you've witnessed someone else overcome. We'll look forward to having you see our next guest next week. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much, Zoe. I appreciate it and enjoyed the discussion.
Same here.